So welcome to today's lecture on marsupial communication. The objective of this lecture is to understand the 4 different sensory modalities that marsupials use to communicate. We'll discuss each of these modalities and we will learn about the types of behaviours that accompany them. From information provided in this lecture and from additional reading that you do on your own, you should gain an understanding of what animal communication is, why it is important, what it involves, and its costs and benefits. You should be able to explain broadly the functional significance of the different modalities used in marsupial communication, and you should acquire knowledge of the different aspects that these different modalities encompass. So why is communication important? Communication in general is one of the most fundamental issues in life and is crucial at all organismal levels. For example, cells must communicate within an organism, and there are specific adaptations for signals that we see at this level, such as hormones and transmitters, which will actually act as information carriers. Communication in animals among individuals has deep implications for their social life, survival, and fitness. So communication systems are among the key research models to elucidate biological processes from within both a mechanistic and an evolutionary perspective. It allows the integration of questions raised in different biological fields, including psychology, physiology, genetics, as well as population biology and evolution. What is communication? So communicatory behaviour is when one individual transmits information to another individual in an attempt to elicit a response in the individual that is receiving the information. The nature of the information is something about the individual that's sending the information or the sender's intentions, which when conveyed to a recipient should be of benefit to the sender, and also it is often a benefit to the recipient as well. There are modalities that we recognise that animals use to share information, and these can be classified as auditory, tactile, chemical, and visual communication. So some species rely mostly on one form of communication, but the majority of animals often use a combination of methods. The communication process requires a number of steps. So first up, there is encoding of some aspect of the sender into a shared code, which is the message. There then would be a device to transmit the message, a medium through which the message would travel, a device at the other end to receive and decode the message, and then generation of a response in the receiver, which is the whole intent of the message to begin with. So the message should contain accurate information, unless, of course, the intention is to deceive the receiver. And the message should be emitted with maximal efficiency and should only be received by that intended individual. However, we see that the environment actually conspires against this process. There is noise, so there's a cacophony of other sounds that may mask vocalizations. The message may be degraded. For example, obstacles can block a visual signal, or sounds can attenuate through the environment. Odours might be dispersed in air or water. And also critically, the message could be intercepted and a hidden competitor or predator may pick up on the message. So animal signals can carry substantial costs to a sender. The costs may lie in the energetic or otherwise physiological cost of producing the signal. It could be in the time devoted to signalling or in the social costs when signals elicit specific responses by other members of the species or even attract predators. So there are often conflicting interests in communication between an animal emitting a signal and those that are receiving the signal, and that must decide whether or not how to respond. So this conflict of interest is especially evident in signals that are used to advertise and defend resources, such as food, space, or mates. There can also be a substantial conflict of interest in parent-offspring communication. So an individual offspring that begs for food will have a different interest than that of its parents, which is investing time and energy to provision all the offspring, and may have to decide how much to allocate to each individual offspring. Selection on signallers will favour signals that exaggerate the quality or need of the signal, signaller. So this is recognised to be cheating or deception, whereas selection on receivers will favour them to extract accurate information from the signal about the sender. So essentially, there's selection on receivers to not be cheated. Thus, if signals consistently provide misleading information, receivers shouldn't stop responding to such signals. The effectiveness of a signal will depend on the receiver's response. So communication systems are recognised to be at equilibrium and are expected to be honest for the most part, but it is that some cheating can persist, at least at a low level. This principle was actually first coined by Zahavi and is recognised as the handicap signalling hypothesis, which essentially indicates that receivers should respond only to those signals or signal components that carry a cost to the sender. So there's ample evidence that signal expression is costly and is linked to an individual's quality, but not all signals can be viewed as handicaps. So, for example, when they're cheap to produce and when the cost-benefit ratio of a signal is low. So each sensory modality, which there are 4, has its advantages and disadvantages. In the advantages of auditory communication is that auditory signals can be conveyed during the day or night. They often convey information about rapidly changing situations, and they're also very flexible in terms of how often they can be emitted, the duration or the volume. A disadvantage of auditory signals is that they can be easily overheard by unintended recipients, as well as the fact that sounds may be difficult to locate or interpret under different conditions. Advantages of tactile communication. The prevailing one is that there's this is the modality that has the fewest environmental constraints, and there's no medium required to transmit the signal. So the information is transferred in an intimate way and therefore is less likely to be misinterpreted. Disadvantage of that, and the flip side of that, is that information is actually unable to be shared over distances, and the intimacy factor can lead to the transference of disease and virus. Chemical communication, signals of this nature can be slow to fade, so that's one benefit. They can also convey information in the absence of the sender, as they are usually laid down, where they will remain in the environment for some time. A disadvantage is that they can be slow to transmit, and they're also unable to convey rapidly changing information about different situations. Visual communication, advantages of this is that in most instances they convey rapidly changing information, with the disadvantages being that they are highly directional, so they must be sent to the receiver's optic receptors with sufficient background contrast to be read appropriately and accurately. And obviously for a lot of species, visual signals are useless when it's dark. So marsupial communication. The majority of marsupials are nocturnal, or they are active at low levels of light, which is around dawn or dusk, described as being crepuscular. So communication is more likely by using auditory or chemical channels rather than visual channels. Non-aggressive tactile communication is mostly confined to parent-offspring interaction and mating behaviour. Visual signals may certainly be important in diurnal species. However, we need to be very cautious on what we infer about what other species might be visualising, based on the fact that as a species we have poor night vision. It's known that colour vision in marsupials is quite an interesting area of research, and they, especially when, in relation to what we know about mammals generally, and it appears that there are both dichromats and trichromats among closely related species. So we're actually going to learn more about this from Jan Hemi, who is an expert on the relationship between sensory processing and animal behaviour. So moving along to look at those four modalities in more detail. Auditory communications or sounds are used to communicate things such as danger, reproductive readiness, and species identification. All marsupials make sounds by vocalising. So the very vocal Tasmanian devil makes virtually the whole spectrum of marsupial calls, and I will just play a clip of that now. Hearing a repertoire of many different sounds, very cat-like, some of them. And this guy starts crunching on something at the end. So yes, you would have heard a repertoire of different vocalisations there from the Tasmanian devil. However, marsupials can also produce sounds using substrates. So brush-tailed phascogales are recognised to foot tap and tail rattle, and all ground-dwelling macropods will foot thump in alarm. And there's also many other noises that these animals emit as they negotiate their way through the habitat. Calls are often given in social situations, including contact calls, agonistic calls, courtship calls, and alarm calls. So contact calls, many marsupial species are solitary and defend an individual home range. However, in group forming species where individuals will actually forage together, so you may have seen in your own observations mobs of kangaroos aggregating together. And in these groups, contact calls will often be made between adults when the habitat interferes with any visual contact. Contact calls between group members may also maintain pair bonds, maintain the integrity of a persistent group, as well as aiding in the recruitment of other group members for the defence or exploitation of a resource. We recognise that contact calls are absent from most possums and gliders, with the exception being the yellow-bellied glider, which actually gives loud calls which can actually be heard over several hundred metres, as well as softer gurgles or moans when feeding close by to a conspecific. Because in marsupials, development occurs mostly via lactation, the loss of maternal contact is a significant threat to pouch young, and a call response in marsupial young is thought to be ubiquitous and functions to draw the mother near. So these calls differ across different species. Dasyurids will actually give a high-pitched squeak, sis, titch, titch, or wheeze, whereas wallabies and kangaroos tend to give hisses, coughs, and squeaks. Interestingly, the common brush-tailed possum will actually give a sound that sounds like a bit of a zook zook. In many species, the mother's response call is of similar sound to what the young has emitted, but of a lower pitch due to the larger body size. Red and eastern grey kangaroo young are able to elicit these calls even before they can leave the pouch. So it's obviously quite an important skill to have to be able to call and maintain contact with your mother. The calls of these two kangaroo species sound very similar, but vary in adaptive ways. So the 3 and 4 syllable calls are qualities that ensure good vocalisation in their respective open and woodland habitats. Agonistic calls, so in aggressive encounters between individuals, calls by the offensive individual are typical of most species. These calls are usually loud and harsh. Phonetic descriptions among marsupials include barks, hisses, huffs, whistles, whines, grunts, growls, snorts, screeches, squeals, etc. If violent encounters occur, the subordinate individual may produce a screech-like cry. This is quite common in marsupials. The Tasmanian devil is recognised to vocalise by stamping and barking in these situations. Defensive calls are similar, but usually higher pitched. So, and a few species do actually have a specific submissive call. Male eastern grey kangaroos actually give a distinctive cough when they're displaced or defeated by another male. So I have some audio of that here. So in this situation, this eastern grey kangaroo is actually emitting those coughs more as a warning off to deter any intruder males. Courtship calls function to attract a mate from some distance away, or they will provide communication during copulation. Females may call during estrus, which is advantageous to species that forage alone and only join together with a male for mating. So female spotted quolls are known to produce prolonged stanzas of a kip kip call. Planigales, dunnarts, and the coulter, females of these species will produce repetitive clicks or tiss to which the male may respond and form a bit of a duet prior to mating. Interestingly, the female common spotted couscous will actually give a loud braying on the night of estrus, advertising to resident males or males in the local area that she is ready for mating. In kangaroos, females give a loud dismissive call when being chased by a male, but in kangaroos, it's usually the male that is vocalising in these situations. Males also make soft sounds as they pursue females and test receptivity. Fat-tailed dunnarts give a distinctive DD call. Male quolls cluck and male Tassie devils huff or clap. Sexually aroused male macropodids and poteroids will follow or stand over the female while repeatedly clucking. And in a few species, calls will be given during mating. So alarm calls precede or coincide with the onset of an attack of a predator, and they may be given when under attack in an attempt to intimidate or retaliate towards the predator. Alarm signals may be vocalisations or sounds produced by a mechanical action. So we learnt before about the yellow-bellied glider that gave gurgling calls. This often occurs in response to owl vocalizations. And these species will sometimes approach the source of a call, a heterospecific call, and may aggressively mob a predator. Brush-tailed phascogales will produce sounds by tail rattling, and foot thumping in alarm is common in macropods and podoroids. So there are some sort of species-specific differences in the way that kangaroos achieve an alarm call. In western grey kangaroos, they tend to double thump while striking the foot with one foot before the other, as do the eastern grey kangaroos, whilst other macropodids tend to strike the feet simultaneously. Moving on to tactile communication, this is the most common form and involves touching. So it's important in the aggregation of groups, conciliation, courtship, and parent-offspring relationships. Tactile signals must be recognised to be patterns of touching that are formalised in some way to a form of communicatory function and not just mere incidental touching. For example, conspecifics will groom one another intentionally using their teeth, lips, tongues, and paws. As we mentioned before, tactile communication is a significant component of the mother-offspring relationship. So mothers will keep the pouch young clean through grooming. They will actually lick the young's cloaca to stimulate urination and defecation, following which the mother will consume the waste. And in kangaroos, young at foot will actually scrabble at the mother's head when she's lying down or crouched to gain access to the pouch. So formalised patterns of touching during courtship and mating are common in marsupials. Male kangaroos will gently nose nudge the female's cloaca to stimulate urination or to smell or taste the urine to test for estrus condition. Other modes to test female receptivity is via a paw and partner type of contact, a grasp or embrace. Common brush-tailed opossums are actually recognised to pummel the female with a rapid up and down forepaw movement on the back. Pawing at the female's back or tail is also common, and sternum rubbing against the female head is pretty common in wallaby species. In all marsupial species, once mounted, the male will grasp the female around the abdomen. So social petaurids have patterns of tactile behaviour which can lead to the formation of pair bonds and strengthen social connections. So, for example, leadbeater's possums will engage in mutual tail licking, where one member of a pair sniffs the cloaca of the other, then moves into a position so that each can lick the other's tail. Yellow-bellied gliders also tail lick, but mutual contact is made between the cloaca of one and the frontal gland of the other. So this is also recognised to be a form of mutual scent marking. The frontal gland of sugar gliders is used to mark group members, but this is most exclusively done by the dominant male. And what you would have recognised is that in these examples, tactile behaviour appears to be a secondary outcome of a form of scent distribution. So moving on to that now, chemical communication. This occurs through the release of pheromones into the environment in some way. Once perceived by a receiving conspecific, pheromones will bring about a behavioural reaction specific to that particular odour. So there are two kinds of pheromones. There are releaser pheromones, which will produce immediate behaviours, and primer pheromones, which cause physiological changes and have a delayed effect that usually lasts longer. Pheromones are either released from specialised glandular areas or represent metabolites in urine or faeces. And odour-producing glands are present in the majority of marsupial species. So the diversity of chemical messages an individual can produce is somewhat limited by the number and distribution of these odour-producing glands. Typically, mammals have holocrine sebaceous glands associated with hairs and ecrine sweat glands widespread over the bodies. Marsupials actually have specialised exocrine glands that vary between families. So some of these glands are more prominent in males than in females. For example, the frontal scent gland is clearly visible in male sugar gliders, but not for the females. So as I mentioned previously, it is this species where the dominant male will mark other group members with that frontal scent gland. Sternal glands are found in male koalas, but not the females, and the gland is especially large and prominent during the breeding season. So what happens is that the males are performing a lot of scent marking and rubbing on trees, which actually wears away at their chest hair, resulting in a bare patch at that region. With this in mind, chemical signals are often used as signposts, providing information about an individual's location and identity, but especially reproductive condition, age, group membership, or dominance. Scent marks have the advantage that the message can continue to serve as a signal in the absence of the sender. And when the scent mark is used to mark a home range, others can actually determine current occupancy by odour fade-out rate. Males of some species, for example koalas, will vigorously rub their prominent sternal gland against tree branches and trunks, and several macropodids will actually engage in what is called bush displays or grass pulling. So a male will grasp vegetation to his sternal gland and vigorously rub against it. So many species have labial and ear glands, and face washing serves a dual function of cleanliness and self-anointment with their own individual odour. Nasonasal contact and sniffing at the mouth and ear and other parts of the head is a prominent feature of marsupial olfactory investigation, as well as behaviours such as cloacal dragging, sternal and chin rubbing, mouth wiping, and drooling all serve to mark objects in the environment. And it's males that we recognise that do this more often than females. And this is quite commonly to mask the scent of other males. Novel objects or familiar objects with a novel smell will elicit cloacal marking in fat-tailed dunnuts, chin and chest rubbing in common brush-tailed possums, especially those tree limbs and trunks in the vicinity of their den and during the mating season when they might be consorting with a mate. So we recognise that then older males tend to perform sternal rubbing more often than younger males. Marking is also most frequent when new males enter an area. Interestingly, other males show no overt response to these marks, and I wonder why that is. Signals are added from urine and fecal deposits in koalas, where males will actually dribble urine on branches and sometimes inspect the base of trees where urine and faeces accumulate. So wombats will deposit faeces in discrete piles on novel objects within their home range, and conspecifics will move around and consciously smell these dung marks when foraging, which will provide information about sex and reproductive status contained in those faeces odours. And we know that common ringtail possums will discriminate between sexes and individuals from urinary odours. So most, if not all, close-range social encounters involve some olfactory investigation by one individual or another. Examples of these have been provided in the tactile communication section. So when we talked about mother-young nasal sniffing, and when males sniff or nudge a female's cloaca to stimulate urination to assess estrus condition. But many marsupials also show what's called a phlegmon response. So this is a grimace with a lip curl, which is pictured there with a horse performing this response. This assists in the transport of urine to the vomeronasal organ, which is lined with receptors for steroids such as estrogen. So ourselves can only smell the most pungent odours, so it's really difficult for us as investigators to determine what information is being transferred by pheromones in other species. And what we can do is test these capabilities through odour discrimination trials. So a promising experimental technique is the odour taste aversion method. This is used often in the field with open range animals. What happens is a test subject is provided access to drinking tubes attached to an odour patch. One odour patch will be a positive odour, which provides potable water, and the negative odour provides a nasty tasting, usually nasty taste using an odourless quinine solution. So if an individual can discriminate, they will only drink from the positive tubes when they're also presented with the negative tubes in random but counterbalanced order. These types of trials have been used a lot in marsupials, and it's demonstrated that red kangaroos have discriminative capacities equal to rats. It's showing that red-necked patamelians and common ring-tailed possums will discriminate functionally significant odours in urine samples. And it's also been shown that koalas can discriminate sex and reproductive status of urine samples. So moving now to visual communication, this can be displayed in two forms, either deliberate or involuntary. Deliberate visual communication is a behavioural adaptation, for example, when primates bare their teeth as a sign of threat. In contrast, involuntary visual communication is a physical trait that is not controlled by the sender but still sends a signal. So, for example, the bright plumage of a male bird that alerts a potential mate that they are of high fitness. Visual signals may be the fastest form of communication. They're often easy to produce and localise. This can be an advantage when the signal is received only by the intended individual, but can also be a disadvantage, for example, if that signal is intercepted by a predator. And as we mentioned before, visual communication is not effective in all conditions, and it's typically dependent on the amount of light available and most effective during the day. So in marsupials, visual signals are best described in species that are large, conspicuous, and active during the day. Visual signals most often accompany behaviours that function as a predator alarm or evolved in agonistic or sexual interactions. So an upright posture is commonly assumed by most species when alarmed, and this may call the attention of a predator to discovery and trigger dependent offspring to enter the pouch, find protective cover, or just move closer to its mother. Studies in large macropodids show degrees of vigilance associated with movement from a crouch position to semi-erect and then to a fully erect position. And it's been shown that time spent foraging actually increases for an individual, with vigilant time decreasing when there's an increase in group size. So there is a benefit of aggregating in a mob, is that individuals will spend less time being vigilant and have more time to forage and consume food. Agonistic interactions are accompanied by visual signals that demonstrate body size and weaponry. So an approach to an opponent may be accompanied by a threat display, a signalling of strength and aggressive intent. We see this in common wombats. So they will actually charge an opponent in an aggressive manner and then stand with their forepaws splayed, body humped to emphasise their size. Their head may be swinging from side to side with a feigned biting motion. Their teeth may be bared or revealed, and the ground may the teeth may be ground and the body may convulse as well. So pretty scary stuff. Macropodids perform in a weird stiff-legged walk where one or both opponents will walk broadside to the other, and they'll have an arch back. The hair will be raised, and there will be a progression on the tips of the fore and hind feet and the tail. So just basically enhancing size. Common brush-tail possums have quite characteristic agonistic displays prior to and during a physical encounter. As an opponent approaches, an individual may adopt a quadrupedal stance with the body lowered, head forward, ears forward and flattened, and the mouth open. They'll also be emitting some auditory communication, such as hisses and grunts. The next stage is that will sort of rise to a tripedal stance with one forelimb raised and extended laterally to reveal the palm and extended claws in a kind of slapping motion. The final stage will be to rise to a bipedal stance with an open gait and loud vocalizations. In this stage, the sternal gland is actually revealed. So the size, secretory activity, coloration, and odoriferous characteristics are known to be positively correlated to testosterone concentration in males. So I guess that sort of the revealing of the sternal gland is a clear visual signal to an opponent that you may be a dominant male and not to be messed with. The principal weapons in a fight include the forepaws and the lower incisor teeth, which will be maximally exposed during these encounters. And we may see that the tail will sweep from side to side to add further visual components to the display. So I have a video of a grumpy encounter between two possums. So we have one that is attempting to climb a tree with an opponent approaching. There's a bit of a scuffle at first, and then when the possum finally comes back, the possum on the right finally comes back, you will see that tripedal stance right there with the ears flattened. So there's no baring of teeth, and I don't have the audio attached to this clip, but there was also no hissing. So not too aggressive in this encounter. So male numbats are a species that I work on, and I think that they are the masterful communicators. The males are very clever. In this species, the production of young is a synchronized and highly seasonal event, both in the wild and captivity. So the breeding season occurs between late December to February. Captive held male numbats undergo seasonal changes, and this occurs in wild male numbats. And what we see is an increase in testis size as there is an enhancement of sperm production, and we see increased gland size. So male numbats will have quite a distinct sternal gland during the breeding season. And as I mentioned, they have a suite of communicatory behaviours used in reproduction. In the captive numbats held at the Perth Zoo, it's recognised that when they're first paired with a male, males will mark the enclosure with these sternal gland secretions and urine. So that's checking the chemical communication box. The males will follow the female, so making sure that they're in sight. That's checking the visual communication box. They will elicit vocalizations that consist of soft clicks as a form of auditory communication. And when estrus is detected, the male will then begin to attempt to mount the female. So that is a form of tactile communication of his intent to reproduce with her. So that is the end of the lecture. Here we have further reading. If you would like to learn more about marsupial communication, And I've also included a link to a video about wombat attacks. Thanks for tuning in.